Welcome to Fleets Evolved, where we talk about the reality of commercial fleet electrification. Each episode, I sit down with industry experts to cut through the noise and explore what's actually working, what isn't, and where fleet operators get stuck. If you're responsible for electrifying a fleet, you already know that this isn't a walk in the park, and getting the decisions right really matters. I'm Natasha Fry. Welcome to the show. Today's episode explores the alignment of energy, mobility and infrastructure and why it matters for fleets. I'm joined by Roger Hunter, a seasoned energy transition leader with executive and board experience spanning the global EV charging ecosystem. Roger currently advises and works with Autel, which is where our paths first crossed through their work with Mayor. He also serves as an independent board member at Ignitis, one of the largest energy providers in the Baltics, and home to leading charge point operator Ignitis On. He previously led electric mobility globally at Shell, helping create and scale Shell Recharge Solutions, and later held global responsibility for EV charging at BorgWarner. Beyond his corporate roles, Roger has played a leading part in the wider EV transition through the Zemo partnership and by serving on the Charge Up Europe board, helping shape industry standards and accelerate zero-emission transport across Europe. With experience spanning energy, infrastructure, manufacturing and policy, he brings a unique perspective on how these worlds are converging and what it means for fleets. Roger, I am so delighted that you agreed to come on to our podcast, Fleets Evolved. Firstly, how are you? And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hi, Natasha. All good. Looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Me too. I always get excited when we get to gather industry leading experts onto the pod because I just think it brings a different perspective. And our conversation today, I think, it could be very, very broad. So the alignment of energy, mobility and infrastructure is a massive topic. And whilst I appreciate your experience isn't necessarily fleet focused, clearly that's an angle that I want to explore today, representing Mayor Fleet Services and kind of the fleet side of things. So I guess let's kick off. And my first subject or question would be around how would you describe where we are in the transition right now in the state of the market?
Yeah, let me start by maybe breaking the transitions down. So you've got the overall energy transition, and then you've got the mobility transition, and the two have naturally converged, and the converging point so far to date has been electric mobility. And I think if we start actually with the energy transition and just get an anchor point on where we are with that transition globally, it's in a point of it being essentially unstoppable, moving and transitioning towards cleaner energy. Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at some of the stats around, I don't know, well over $2 trillion invested in renewable energy around the world, actually mainly from China and India last year. I think that's double the amount versus the fossil energy investments. I think something like 90% of all new generation is from renewable sources. I mean, these is kind of pretty impressive stats with respect to the overall growth of clean energy. So look, clean energy is going to happen. It's on its way. It's obviously going at different speeds in different places around the world. And, some places there's a lot more wind, like for instance, the UK, we're number 2 in the world for wind behind China, which I think, again, for in terms of achievements, I think that's fantastic from the UK standpoint. And for other places, it's perhaps more about solar or other renewable sources like hydro, etc. So that's the the very high level on the transition to cleaner energy. I think if we look at mobility, what's really happened there is the use of digital technology seems to have changed the game for the users of mobility. I mean, just like ride hailing is just one example straight away. We can talk about the move to autonomous vehicles, which is, we see commercial trials already happening around the world there, in the UK at some point soon. you look at the electric mobility revolution. I mean, we have nearly 2 million electric vehicles in the UK today. That's a lot. This has happened. It started. I mean, maybe you could think of it as kind of the end of the beginning of that transition rather than the beginning of the end. So, it's well on its way. Again, I think it's unstoppable. Obviously, it can go at different speeds. I think regulation for both of those transitions is key in terms of what speed it goes at from this point. But I guess that the thing is, it's happening. It is happening. So those are the two sort of taken separately. If you bring them together and say, well, okay, they're actually connected now, they're converging. I think the place that they converge is naturally electric vehicles. And again, if you look at the state of the transition today, that convergence has happened. And why do I say that? Well, already electric vehicles, which have a battery, and that battery load is able to be aggregated together using, again, digital software tools, etc., in order to provide flexibility to the grid. And I've seen sort of various stats on this again. I think one of the leading home charger businesses, I think they have around 250,000 home chargers. Around 20% of their customers already are flexing are using this flex load. And what do I mean by that? Well, essentially, this is where a battery is being charged, but the charging is stopped or paused or slowed down in response to a need somewhere, a signal. And if you aggregate all that together, that's a lot of power. And if you think about, I don't know, we said about 2 million vehicles. If you think about how much battery tank that is, it's probably about 100 gigawatt hours, which is, again, a phenomenal number. If you think the UK needs 36 gigawatts continuously in order to keep the lights on average across a year. So you start to get an idea about the fact that this is happening. There is already a significant amount of aggregated power load, and the potential is huge. And it's indeed, it's happening today already.
And I think on that subject, I would agree. There are so many factors that influence the ecosystem and what happens, and there's so many different components. And I think there are some really wow factors there, isn't there, Roger, in terms of numbers that you've just quoted back to me and facts. And you're right, it's happening. I mean, what surprised you most about how the market's evolved?
Yeah, I think, before I go on to, actually, I'll make this a bit of a surprise, because I was thinking a little bit about kind of what is the state of play today. And one of the things that came to mind is improving health because of the transition. Okay. And I had a quick look at what the ULEZ zone in London has done in terms of reducing or improving local air quality. And that surprised me, that the nitrous oxide levels had come down 50% in just a couple of years, and the particulate matter levels, these are things that get stuck in your lungs and cause all sorts of horrible things, that come down well over 30% as well. So you kind of think, in such a small amount of time, putting in the right policies and moving across to electric buses and various other electric vehicles in a really important, amazing city has had such an impact on air quality. And that directly has already led to less admissions for asthma. I think it's something like a 30% reduction already. I mean, obviously this changes over time, but in admissions from children suffering with lung-related issues in London. And so that surprised me a bit, actually, as I was sort of tinkering around thinking. And the other thing that surprised me was that when you turn that into sort of money terms, so that basically people being well and not needing to go to hospital as much, if you turn that into money terms, you get into the billions very quickly in terms of preventative health.
And I think people tend to, and like you've admitted there, that it's something that was maybe a little bit of an afterthought for you to look into. It's something that's overlooked. And I think it's so important to not lose sight of, I think with all the pressures, especially businesses in that commercial sense are put under, whether it's legislative, whether it's coming from company directorship, where you have to, electrify fleets of vehicles or transition into an alternative fuel, because, it might not necessarily be electric, especially when you look at HGV and other, other means of switching into something that's different. I just feel sometimes that's lost. And I think it's really good that I think you've picked up on that point, because that alone just proves why this thing needs to happen, and we need to continue on this trajectory, right?
Oh yeah, and we should get into that in more detail as well, because I could go on about energy security as well as being absolutely key. But the other thing that surprised me, because you asked a great question on this. It was actually was also a speed of technology change. So back at Shell, I remember we were always sort of thinking, well, when are we going to get to the point where a battery is less than $100 per kilowatt hour? That was kind of the magic sort of when will that happen? And I remember thinking, gosh, that's going to be really difficult to reach. And we did all the maths and all the rest of it. And now, of course, the latest advancements were at about $50 or sort of converging on that sort of number. It's just, and to put it in context, 25 or 6 years ago or so, it was $500
Yeah.
a kilowatt hour. So, so the speed of change on technology, of course, batteries make up a large part of electric vehicles in terms of the cost. So if you're seeing that kind of improvement on technology, then this just unlocks the business case even more for fleets and for individuals, et cetera, as we see the cost of electric vehicles coming down. So that was something that surprised me, that's gone as fast as it's gone.
Yeah.
In terms of battery cost reductions. So super exciting. Now, of course, there are fluctuations. We can talk about, I don't know, the commodities market and what will the copper price be next year? I don't know, or the lithium price. There are going to be fluctuations, but ultimately they're pretty mature markets that have now invested in new mines, new techniques. There's clarity, I think, in terms of how that cycle works, such that those commodity prices, I don't think, are going to drastically change this trajectory of lower cost batteries as we go forward.
I think there's also been a huge investment in the research and development, hasn't there, in terms of being able to achieve the speed. It's all pretty new. I mean, I've been in the industry, not as long as you, Roger, I don't think, but this is my 8th year in there, but I've come from like commercial vehicle background, and, research and development for me is a key part of this, because it's a bit of an unknown entity with some of the things that we're trying to explore in terms of what works. And, we've got to think of longevity and the sustainability of how these products and solutions are being brought to, customers, and how people can use them. So I think research and development's really, really key. Okay, so in terms of just looking the ecosystem view, I mean, how business models are obviously shifting, from what they're used to looking like, and there's obviously certain value being created in the ecosystem. How do you see the roles of like utilities, charging providers, and fleet operators evolving within the ecosystem?
It's a really interesting one, actually. I think you mentioned 3 there, but because I think the short answer here is that historically they were quite separate, and I think now they're more integrated. I think that's the quick answer. So it becomes a bigger ecosystem, and I think I think this kind of collaboration and connectivity. I talked about data and software earlier. That's going to be a red thread through all of this. Joining the dots across all of that is going to be so important to create value. I think that each of these are the ones that are, when you think about how they're successful, the companies that are successful within utilities and charging providers and fleets, that the successful companies are very customer centric.
Yes.
So they're very much starting with the customer and working backwards, rather than just having a product and sort of pushing it onto the customer and assuming that they're just going to accept it. So I think the other thing around how it's evolving, how this ecosystem is evolving, is that if you look specifically, let's just take the charging part of the ecosystem. Before we go, when we talk about the joining up to the utilities bit, if we just look at the charging part, I think historically, when it was new, many of the companies felt that they had to kind of do everything. So if you're a charge point operator, you also invested in software, and you also did this, and you also did that. So it was one of these where you had to have a bit of everything. And now it seems like it's thinned out into different companies providing point solutions
to create the
across the
value, to
board,
create the whole
to create
value.
the value. Exactly. And like what your company's doing. I mean, you very much bring a lot of people together. Yeah, and you're able to work with, say, Autel, who's super at the manufacturing of the hardware. That's what they specialize in, and that's what they focus on. And because they specialize and focus on that, they're really good at it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that has been a big shift round to sort of everybody's now thinned out to do the bits that they're really good at, and some people are really good at bringing it all together.
I think that's just a culmination, though, of how the market matures, isn't it? I mean, when I first started in this space 8 years ago, I think we were probably guilty of trying to do that, Roger, where we go, we want to retain the full control. We think we're really good at. Obviously, we've never manufactured our own hardware, but when it comes to like installing the infrastructure, or being really integral to how the software needs to develop and perform, I think it's just a culmination of then experience over time and recognizing and understanding you can still create value and improve those efficiencies actually by bringing in the experts in their own individual right, because you can still create the value for the customer in terms of managing the whole process, but bringing in the right industry experts at the right point, I think is critical now to delivering some of these solutions for customers.
And those industry. Let's talk a minute about those industry experts, because they really have learned through doing over the last 5 years, and they've got really good at it. So if you're a CPO, if you've gone out, if you're a charge point operator, and you're now really good at finding the best locations and working with the local councils, and you kind of know where all the traps are, you know where all the tricks are, you sort of figured all that out. And I think that's what gives competitive advantage. That's what's now able to drive towards profitability. As we're in a position of scaling. Yeah, we absolutely need scale in order to get to profitability across all the different business models in the EV charging space.
But it's the same with the manufacturers, isn't it? I mean, you obviously represent Autel, Roger, and for me, there's been a huge shift recently over, from government legislation, around reliability and how these things are expected to perform, because a lot of this stuff isn't new in the ground. You and I have been in the industry a long time, and there's legacy hardware out there that actually isn't fit for purpose, that doesn't meet the standards around reliability and governance. And I think that's where the market is now starting to really kind of pivot into key manufacturers or key people or influencers in the value chain actually have demonstrable experience, can deliver quality solutions, and continue to do so. Because I think the market is saturated, isn't it, with when you go right across the ecosystem, it's saturated with choice. And I think this is where some of the customers get a bit confused, because they're not quite sure, should they be going and working with a company that offer a full turnkey, but yet maybe work with others to create that value, or should they be going out and doing it alone and picking individual components? I think this is because so many people, you look at software solutions. How many software solutions? I don't know. I can't count on one hand, or those that I'm aware of. The market, I think, has shifted now. I think there are probably only a few really out there that can probably do their area of specialism and stay contained within that area of specialism and do it really, really well. So I think the market has shifted and evolved is my point. Would you agree with that?
Well, Natasha will probably come onto this later, I guess, but what's needed within such an ecosystem as it's now separated out is this ability for everything to be plug and play. So every car has to be able to charge at every charge point. Yeah, every, I don't know, charge point hardware needs to be able to interface with a variety of different software. You've got to get the standardization across like the protocols, and I think that's really important, such that everything does become plug and play, and you have less of these issues around interoperability.
Oh, I know. I think the customer experience, we just need it to be simple and straightforward.
Yeah,
Irrelevant of who you are as a customer, whether you're pulling up to a public charge point, if you're a fleet operator, or if you're using charging infrastructure at home or at work. The
yeah,
reality is, we've already discussed this, right? Electric mobility is happening. It's moving at a pace. And I think people get a little bit put off by it just doesn't feel easy, and it needs to just be super simple, doesn't it? And you need to
it
be
does.
able to the simplicity is you either pull up to a charging station and just plug in, and you don't have to do much in terms of interact. But until we get to that point, it just needs to be a simple solution for them that doesn't give them a headache. They can just walk away and know that they're going to get that state of charge and be able to just move on with their day and not get distracted by things that could potentially go wrong. And everybody in the ecosystem has a responsibility and is accountable to making that happen. So I just wanted to touch on a point now, because you mentioned customer centricity, and I love that, Roger, because I
Yeah,
love the same ilk, and
yeah,
I obviously leading sales here for Mer have been involved with customers on a daily basis, and I truly believe that they have to be at the heart of everything we do.
yeah,
My point here, though, is they don't always necessarily understand what they want. They might understand the end goal and have an objective to achieve. But I think trying to get them to that point, I think it's super important that they are well informed at the very front of what we're trying to achieve with them. Um, let's
yeah.
specifically now touch on fleet. All right. And I appreciate that it's probably a bit more tunnel vision for you, but I'm really keen to understand, like, when you advise large fleets, or you have done in the past, or you were looking to, what would you tell them to prioritize right now? Let's just assume that they haven't started this journey in terms of any alternative fueling methods across their fleet of vehicles they're responsible for. What would you advise them today?
Well, it kind of starts with understanding, I think. So if you start reaching out and understanding more about the opportunities, because the opportunities are huge with electric fleets, and really it's the I always felt that we would get the most traction in terms of uh, electric vehicles coming into the world through fleets. Yeah, because there's the most benefit just obtainable by fleets, because of their mileage and their scale, and the fact that it's cheaper to run, cheaper to maintain. The total cost of ownership of an electric fleet is already, for certain fleets, way better than that of petrol and diesel. It's happened. It's already there. So I think the priority should be, well, get on this bandwagon. Get on with
Get
it,
on with it.
and get on with it. But I think the advice would be, have a plan. Yeah. And because this is the thing, it doesn't need to be a scary thing. Like right now, step one, do some learning and understanding. Step two, get a plan. Work with some
Yes.
people as you need to get a plan, and then take action. Step three. And taking action doesn't need to be scary. It can be quite small, actually, quite a small first step. And then think of where you're going to be, do that first step, but knowing where you want to be in 5 years' time. Yeah, because this is something that you can get into and just in a modular way, build your EV fleet capability as you go along.
And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I think having a plan is super important, but I also believe be really smart with who you engage with, and you need partners that are agile, that are ready to flex and adopt change. Because God, the instances, Roger, where I've worked with clients or customers and they've gone, this is what we need to achieve, and this is how we're going to get there. And with the dewest of respect, I'm not quite sure who's advised them. I'm not quite sure, but it just doesn't feel quite right. And I think until you really start to challenge those plans and build those relationships and understand what they're trying to achieve, I would agree with you, because you don't have to attack all this in one big chunk, right? You'll have, and what I tend to see is you might have a fleet operator that will go, the directive we've been given from our C-suite and our ESG departments is we have to be 60% electrified within the next 5 years. That's probably all they're told. And at that moment, it's kind of like, ego, guys, you're on your own to go away and have a look at what that actually means, what the impact will be, the consequences you need to. So for me, it's about proving that concept as well. Just getting the first things moving and just proving that this will work for the business. There are so many things that will influence the speed of change, though, in this whole ecosystem. I mean, utility companies, the DNO and the grid connections, all of that will have an impact in making decisions. But I think and I agree with you, the plan has to start somewhere and then it will evolve. Of course it will. It won't be the same as what you started 12 months ago. Things will evolve, but for the better, because like you quite rightly said, I think you just have to get on with it in the nicest sense possible, because if you don't, I think you'll end up being left behind at a time when it's probably crucial for you to get a really good understanding of what you need to do to achieve your outcome.
Yeah, it's going to happen. I mean, we do have to put the caveat here that for heavy duty fleets, it can depend what is your fleet looking like. Yeah,
yes.
Because I think for some fleets, it's an absolute no-brainer. And if you haven't done it already, you should have done it.
Yes.
For others, it's going to take longer because there's not as many vehicles in the heavy duty space. It will need more regulatory support.
And not just heavy duty as well. I think you've got we support customers on many customers that have varying fleets, and they look at there's different fleet profiles, but some vehicles can't even be electrified at the moment. When you look at construction and vehicle highways and vehicles that are towing generators and things like that, and I think you have to accept that might not be an immediate, but having it in the plan and knowing that it's something that's probably a little bit further out. Because then you're right, you have to keep an eye on what the manufacturers are doing, how they're developing their technology to support electrifying those particular categories. And then the heavier goods, you're absolutely right. That first mile where you've got the heavier vehicles doing the distribution and travelling the highways across the country, it might not necessarily be, the cost of the vehicles at the moment totally outweigh that return on any investment because they're just far too expensive. Hence why you've got the Zen Freight and you've got the government schemes supporting a lot of this transition at the moment. A lot of the data that will come out of these schemes will be over the next 5 years. And that should hopefully give some operators and some companies some comfort around what the true life cost analysis actually does look like in reality. Mm-hmm. Because for those heavier vehicles, it's not really a proven concept, is it? It doesn't exist really.
That's right. And I think when you put this plan together, again, there's really competent folks now across the ecosystem that can help advise on all the different aspects. And one of the key aspects is understanding the policy landscape. The policy landscape is there to help. Yeah. And ultimately, it changes. And you need to understand how it will change. But generally, it has been a force for good for accelerating the total cost of ownership parity with a diesel or petrol equivalent. And generally speaking, it's been very successful there. But navigating what that looks like and when things will be phased out, because they will be phased out, things will change. So you kind of need to understand how that policy is going to change as well, how those incentives are going to change, how the taxation is going to change. Getting advice on that, getting clarity, putting that in the TCO model, really important.
But then there's so much information available to people, just doing a quick Google search or, understanding some of the policy and legislation. So it might feel quite overwhelming, but I do agree with you in the sense of, when you're advising fleets, you touched on a really good point. It's knowledge, isn't it? It's getting the facts right. It's understanding the policy and the legislation and then trying to translating that into your own language and how that affects you and what that means for you. You touched on a really good point earlier around software in this industry and also around, charging in particular. And you've talked about customer centricity and their experience in this space. How important do you think it is for reliability and the software when it comes to charging? I mean, is that a massive influence at the moment? Is that something that customers are now really wanting to get under the skin of, is like the reliability and around the software?
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, I think from a software perspective, you're absolutely right that reliability is underpinned by the software, and software is essentially taking all these IoT devices and make sure that they all kind of hook up together and then it takes it many steps further by already sort of preempting if something is going to go wrong, having data. Data is very, very important in terms of where the failures are and being able to prevent and preempt them and to be able to prepare for them. But also it goes even further back to this transition, these energy and mobility transitions coming together. It links into the energy part of this. So again, you've got this whole energy system that actually at times of the day really needs flexibility that will come from the growing load from all these electric vehicle batteries when they're plugged in. It'll get even more complex when it becomes bidirectional and vehicle to grid happens, which will happen in the next few years as well. All of it's underpinned by the software. Yeah, if you can't get standardization across the protocols, and if you can't get the software to work, then things won't be reliable. Things won't be able to be interoperable, plug and play across from the vehicle all the way to the grid connection. So yeah, the role that software plays is just unbelievably important. And I think it does come back to these customer frictions, because it's the software, when it works well, that just makes it seamless and easy. And that's where we've got to get to. And at the moment, any practitioners listening to this, who are in the middle of EV and growing their EV infrastructure, will know that when there's a problem, you have to get like 3 or 4 people together and figure out what's going on and look at the logs here and what's, in the future, very soon, in my view, because of the improvements in artificial intelligence, that's all just going to solve itself. Yeah, we will be in a position where the software will solve this. And you've only got to look at how far we've come in the last few years in terms of improvements in reliability to actually get the confidence to say, yeah, that's actually realistic.
It's confidence, isn't it? And I think the whole bit around software for me, the less the customer hears any noise, the better it's working. Yeah. So in the background, you should have CPOs or whoever's responsible in that whole kind of infrastructure piece, monitoring and making sure that the software is doing what it's supposed to do. But from a customer perspective and their perception, they don't hear anything. That just means it's working and it's doing what it's supposed to do. They can self-serve, they can access the data that's there if they need it. And I think that's the bit where we need to get to. It's just the less noise they hear, and it needs, resolving issues, keeping reliability where it needs to be, improving uptime. All of those things should be the responsibility of others other than the customer. And I think once we get to that point, that truly does show. I mean, that does lead on to the next question, because I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think defines a successful charging ecosystem or a charging infrastructure?
Well, the ecosystem itself is successful when this interoperability problem is completely solved. So that, as I mentioned, that every vehicle can charge with every charge point can work properly on various back ends. And it all seamlessly is plug and play in the background. So it's kind of the nature of an ecosystem coming together, and also the energy providers being able to use the flexibility of people's vehicle load, when they plug in. So that's that kind of collaboration element. I mean, I can only use the word collaboration in terms of coming together that's enabled by software as a technology. Those two are absolutely critical for making this work. I think, and I sort of touched on it earlier, everybody's got to do their bit well as well. So the reliability of the hardware manufacturers, making sure that the right componentry, improving on manufacturing standards, improving cybersecurity, getting all those elements that are just the basics right, is going to be key as well. So this kind of get the basics right in each of the business areas, and then across the ecosystem, get the interoperability right, and do that through the right kind of collaboration. I think policy as well needs to be joined up between energy and mobility as well. So there's quite a lot that has to come together. Again, I'm optimistic because of the progress we've made to date. I'm optimistic, and because of the improvements in overall digital capabilities. As that makes me optimistic as well. So despite this being quite complex, joining all these things together in order to create the value for the customer, it is very doable. It just takes time and effort.
I would agree. That's good insight. What great insight. Is there anywhere in this whole kind of ecosystem then, in your view, where we still, or the industry, should I say, that still needs to mature, that maybe isn't operating or moving at the speeds that you've started to witness? Is there anything there that you think this just needs to accelerate a little bit now?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted this whole flex value piece to accelerate a bit faster than it has. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, it is at last, it's now here, and I think I don't know if you'd heard some of the numbers, but because they've always varied over time. But if you're on some sort of flexible tariff and you've got a charger that's plugged in, at home, you can make the kind of value you can create from that is something between like £200 to say £500 a year. Now, it doesn't mean that you get all that value, but there's
Yes.
just there's that value of flexibility to the power system and those involved in it. Inherently, when that's all aggregated together and actually used as a force for good, it creates value. I mean, just put simply, you can imagine that you don't have to build another gas plant for generation, which you only use for sort of half an hour a week or something. You don't need to do that anymore because you've actually done something really clever with the demand side of this problem. So I think we need more of that. Yeah, that's an area where we've got to do more harnessing this flex load. And some of that's digital and some of that's collaboration. But look, it's going to happen. It just takes time. Actually, back to fleets, I'm really excited about what that means for fleets because they're going to benefit more than others because there's so many more vehicles and they've got
that guaranteed usage, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. The guaranteed uses. Where's the pattern of how vehicles are used? But they've also got depots which have other energy needs, and then you can start putting stationary batteries in the depots. I mean, I've seen these 3-in-1 solutions grow quite a bit. I don't know if you've heard of these. So, the 3-in-1 is that you've got a solar panel, a battery, and charging infrastructure. That's the three.
Yes.
And you put it
Yep.
all behind the fence, and you've basically creating yourself a mini power plant, which for now is about helping your own power needs behind that fence. But over time, with bidirectionality, vehicle to grid, you're going to be able to monetize it the other way as well. So I think that's tremendously exciting. And therefore, V2G is, to answer your question, an area where we need more clarity. I mean, let me say that what I'm hearing is in the EU, they're a bit ahead of where we are in the UK. I'm quite jealous of that. So they've managed to, I think, bring together the right people back to collaboration in order to have the right conversations. They're talking about joined up policy and standards in a more advanced way than we are doing in the UK yet. Now, we're going to get there. I think actually 2026 is probably going to be the year of V2G here. And that will give us a big boost such that fleet owners, fleet operators, and other customers will benefit from this value in a few years' time.
I agree with you. The excitement that I feel in this particular space. I mean, I get excited about the whole thing, right? But fleets, commercials, and what people will actually might be able to achieve, I think is going to be something that is really exciting for all involved. And I think to be a part of that at this moment in time is something that's really special. Roger, we're coming towards our time now. And I guess one of the things I want to ask you is, what does excite you most about the next decade? I mean, it's a long time, I get that, but we know how quick time flies. What excites you most about the next decade in mobility and energy? And a secondary part to that question would be, and what risks do you think could slow progress?
Yeah, I mean, it's a decade-long time, isn't it? Well, I think the overall thing is growth. Yeah, I mean, there's just going to be so much growth. There's growth in electricity demand. I mean, look at what's happening with data centers. Yeah. And I think, growth of mobility solutions, growth of jobs. We've not talked about jobs yet today. That's really important in this space. There's going to be more innovation. There's going to be cleaner journeys, back to the health point that I made earlier, less pollution. I think it's better conditions as well for drivers. It just seems to me, I've had quite a look at kind of what it's like to be a driver in an electric truck versus a diesel truck. That in terms of overall, it's just a nicer experience. I also think we've got greater energy independence and energy security to look forward to. And back to my little picture of our own power plant, behind the fence. And then when you aggregate that together, it gives us more resilience against issues that could go wrong in the grid as well. So look, that's all coming. Some of it's here already. Some of it's coming. I am excited about seeing what's happening with autonomous vehicles. I do think that's something that can improve safety, and it can improve efficiency. It can move goods and people in a more cost-effective way. And yeah, we've really got to find, as I mentioned earlier, the true potential of V2G, but also smart charging, V1G, and harnessing all that plugged in EV charging power load, as well as all the stationary batteries that are going to go into the system, and leveraging AI to make all that work perfectly and become invisible. I think that's the point you made really well. So in the next 10 years, those teething problems, they're going to be gone.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just think about what some of the teething problems we were struggling with in the industry just 3 or 4 years ago around things like reliability. A lot of them are gone.
Yes. And I would agree. I think everything is accelerating. It's such a phenomenal pace right now. I'm super excited for the next 10 years. And all those points you've referenced, I think, are really valid, crucial, important points. And, what a place to be, right? And to be part of it and to experience it and to witness that change. I mean, even when you look back 10 years ago, it was a totally different landscape, wasn't it? When you look at the infrastructure that was in the ground and the role that the utilities companies played in this and the whole ecosystem, whilst at that moment we thought it was really accelerating. I mean, look what we've achieved in the last 10 years. So I think it's a really exciting place to be.
Well, you asked about risks, though. I mean, I do think that there is a risk around, certainly a risk around, firstly, there's always a risk to this not going as fast as it could go if companies lose there's myopic focus on the customer. Yeah, back to your simplicity and all the rest of it. I mean, if you haven't got that, it's going to take longer. So customer centricity, really important, but also policy. Yeah. So back to some consistency around policy. Now, why do I say this? Why is this such an important piece? Because you do see policies change all the time. Fine. But some of the really key policies, like the ZEV mandate, like the CO2 emission standards, which is the equivalent in Europe, you need consistency on those. And why do I say that? Because of investor confidence. We've talked about customer confidence, but we've not really talked about investor confidence. That is absolutely critical, because these companies in this space, a lot of them still in a fragile state, should we put it, not making a lot of money. Yeah. And as a result, we've seen job losses, we've seen restructurings happen already within the industry, and we will continue to see that. We'll see consolidation. So if we have a crisis of confidence that is brought on due to political issues driving radical changes in existing very sensible policies that kind of create tectonic shifts in terms of confidence reduction, that's a really bad thing. That is not what this industry needs right now at all.
Very good closing thoughts there, Roger. I think it could almost be detrimental to everything we've achieved to date, right? We might not be where we want to be, and there's this huge path and trajectory for growth. And I would agree with you. Investor confidence is massive. I think having that confidence shattered or at least questioned could be detrimental to everything that everybody within this ecosystem is trying to achieve. So circling back round then, because you've given us lots of good insight today, Roger, back to kind of fleet, which is what I am particularly interested in. And I'm just conscious and I'm aware that, we try and attract quite a lot of fleet professionals with our podcast. If the listeners were to take one thing away from the conversation that we've had today, what would it be? And that's a very broad question. I understand that. And I expect you probably want to say quite a lot with that, but
one thing.
What's your view? Yeah, one thing.
Well, I mean, actually, I'll do one sort of. I'll sneak two in if I can, because one's almost like a little bit tongue in cheek. But don't believe what you read in the papers. My goodness, these headlines, the way that they're twisted, in order to kind of prey on people's fear, etc. It does make me a bit cross, actually, some of these headlines still, because they're just not giving the right impression about where the clean energy transition is going, or where the mobility EV charging transition is going, etc., etc. So I mean, that's just a sort of blanket statement, I guess.
Good advice, though, I would still say.
Well, just don't get too spooked by some of the things. But the press has always been that way. I mean, it's not anything new there. But no, the one takeaway, and this will be no surprises, is always about keeping the customer and the end users in mind at all times. And what it comes down to is really being clear. What are the frictions or pain points of these customers and end users you're trying to solve, and then solve them?
And that I love, Roger. I think that is probably one of the best closing comments we've had. And I agree. And I think if we kept that in the hearts and the minds of everything we do, I don't think we'll go too far wrong. Now, I'm not saying that this whole journey is easy, because it's not, right? It is full of complexities and challenges and obstacles, and there are opportunities, however. And I think as long as we just remember who is at the end of this, who are we trying to solve the problem for? And we just want to make this as simple and as pain-free as possible for those that need to experience our solutions, or whatever we decide to put out there. So what an excellent closing comment. And well, this is it for our episode of Fleets Evolve today. I just want to thank the audience for listening, but more so, Roger, a huge thank you to you for sharing all of your insight today, and for all of that inspiration that you've given us. If anything that we've discussed today has raised any questions about your own fleet, you'll find a link in the description and on our website to continue the conversation. Or you can fill out our contact form and one of our experts will be in touch. We will be back soon with another honest discussion on how fleets are really evolving. Goodbye for now.